you for having me.
I watched your entire IG live with Corinne Fox and Dr. Sechkin talking about endo and infertility, which is one of the leading causes of infertility is endometriosis. And what you do with your company is so unique and also just so needed. You are a psychotherapist. Can you tell us a bit about what your company does and why you decided to get into this line of work?
Yeah, so the Fertile Spirit is a comprehensive, you know, destination, I guess, for people who are going through any aspect of a fertility journey. So whether you're kind of just exploring your options and you're thinking maybe I'll do egg freezing and what does that mean for me, to going through IVF, to possibly processing a pregnancy loss, to then getting pregnant or moving through pregnancy into the fourth trimester. We are a place where we have this whole team of coaches and fertility experts in all different arenas to do one-on-one and group coaching to kind of guide you through that process. So everything from fertility coaches who are maybe helping more with like the emotional aspect of it, or helping you kind of understand what are the steps of IVF, what's that like, what should I anticipate, to we have couples coaching, because it can bring up a lot for relationships. We have like a hypnotherapist on staff who can help with some mindset type stuff. We have
Mhm.
people to help with nutrition, and just wellness, because that's such a huge component of
Yeah.
working with it. And functional medicine as well. So more holistic approaches to like detoxing or balancing the body. So yeah, that's what we do.
Well, I love that you do that because I went through the infertility journey. I was diagnosed with it when I was 33 with an anti-Müllerian hormone that was that of someone already pretty much in full-blown menopause in their 50s. And I was just about to turn 33. So that rocked my world. And, to have the dual diagnosis of infertility, endo, it was just kind of like so much pain going on, so much uncertainty. And then on top of this dream I had of becoming a mom one day, not that I wanted it at that time, but getting told, this is going to not go the way you thought it is, and the whole plan kind of being shifted. I actually learned how to do all of and I consider myself very lucky because, as we know, in vitro fertilization is very, very pricey. Not everybody has insurance, and a lot of insurances do not cover this at all. So there's financial strain. There's just so many components. But I was learning how to do my shots on YouTube videos. That's where I learned it. And to think that there was a place that I could go and talk to someone and not have to be like watching YouTube videos of like, oh, how do I flick this needle, or how do I do this injection? And also I felt really alone in the experience. For you being a psychotherapist, what brought you, because there's so many specialties that you could have gone into. Why did you choose this genre of practice?
It's a very long, kind of wild, synchronistic story, but basically I did egg freezing a few years ago. I kind of had this timeline in mind, and I remember like being in my OBGYN's office, and she was like, you might think about that. And I remember driving home and just like being in tears thinking, wait,
Aw,
and that, I mean, I think the stigma around it has already changed so much in the last few years, but just kind of going, wow, like I might have to do this to preserve my fertility. And kind of one thing led to the next, and I ended up working with CNY Fertility, who is like our partner company. Um, and one thing led to the next, and I had like a really powerful experience going through that myself and feeling empowered, but also really challenged, and the financial aspect that you talk about too. And in working with CNY Fertility, we kind of realized there was just this massive need to support women and people who were going through this, and that there's the more kind of emotional side was not being met as much as the nurses and the providers want to be available for that. It's such a huge piece of it, and you really need like a dedicated focus on that. So that's kind of where the Fertile Spirit was born, so to speak.
with your work, what are some of the most, and I know you see all different kinds of things, but what are some of the obstacles that you've been surprised to see? Something that you never thought of when you were going through it yourself?
Um, I mean, I think it's really hard sometimes working with people who've had like recurring failed IVF cycles, or
Mhm.
pregnancy losses, miscarriages, and things like that, and to kind of continue to show up and find uh, new ways of like reframing the experience and looking at it and like keeping hope alive. And a thing that happens a lot, I think, is that when we are disappointed with ourselves or our outcomes or our lab results or whatever it is, we
Mhm.
tend to kind of disconnect from our bodies and we like almost reject ourselves. And it's like, it's actually, we want to do the opposite thing. We want to continue to kind of hold and embrace ourselves. So we look for a lot of different ways of doing that. Like we have to kind of mother ourselves in the same way that we want to become mothers. And so staying with clients through those like real dips is a big challenge, to
Mhm.
help, keep that hope alive and keep the focus.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That definitely is challenging, and it is very, and I think the anxiety that circles it at every stage, like the 10-day wait you hear about, and then the after, and recurrent pregnancy loss and miscarriage, and it's just it's like you said, it just puts an enormous toll psychologically, physically. It's a lot for the body in itself to go through, let alone someone's mental state. What are some coping mechanisms in order for people to keep the hope alive? Because I think, one of the things that people used to say to me was just like, be positive, keep up the good fight. And it was all very well intentioned. But there was a part of me that was like, I don't want to be a fighter. I don't want to have to fight anymore. I just want something to be easy.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a whole kind of spectrum of things that we can do. And one of them is like, as a therapist, I'm like, feel your feelings. Like, if you are enraged, like, let that move through you. If you feel immense grief, like, lay on the floor and let yourself really cry. Because if we're holding that and we're not expressing that, like, we can't just add positivity on top of it. Like, we have to kind of we have to let it almost metabolize it, by expressing it. So I think I really invite people to find ways to do that. We also do, there's a practice, it's called somatic experience, which is a way of working with trauma in the body. So it's, and this, as you said, like, this fertility journey can be, it can actually be traumatic and is for a lot of people. So we want to find ways, whether it's through somatic experience or mindfulness or hypnotherapy, to also just kind of bring the nervous system back into a more regulated state, so we're not living in fight, flight, or freeze. And when we do that, all the cortisol levels, the hormones start to come more into balance, which is what we want to optimize our fertility. So finding those ways, having an ally, having a coach, having someone who knows it, who's been through it, who has so many amazing success stories to share, who can kind of hold the darkness and the light of all of it, is so important. And then also, like, community. We heal in community. We tend to isolate when we go through hard things, and certainly going through this. So this is why, like, the groups that we have, I think, are really effective, in tandem with all these other things.
Yeah, no, those are some excellent points. In terms of partnership, so there's all variations, right, that you see of the single person who wants to do fertility preservation, like egg freezing, and then there's those that are ready to go ahead and do an embryo transfer. Some people do it alone, other people do it with partner. You mentioned that it can be very, very taxing for couples.
Mhm.
How does a couple, and I know these are like very big questions in a short amount of time, but how does a couple, especially if they've tried or they're unable to do it on their own, for physiological, biological reasons, same-sex partners, those kinds of things, infertility, how does a couple prepare for what could present as a very stressful time in their relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important that communication is there. And that might seem really obvious. Like, of course we need to communicate, but a lot of times it's like it's saying the unspoken thing. It's like voicing the elephant in the room in a way that is like held with loving kindness. And I think that this process can bring up feelings of shame and guilt, and like those become internalized and hidden. And so really finding a safe way to express what's going on and to feel collaborative in how things are moving forward. Sometimes you might get one partner who's just like, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and the other partner doesn't really feel like they have a voice in it. So I mean, again, whether this is a couple just kind of doing this on their own and having these conversations, or working with a coach or a therapist to hold that space for them so that both sides can be expressed. And often too, we can kind of get stuck in relationships in a place where, even though there's a lot of love there, we're communicating from this kind of logical place. Oh, this is what I think, this is what I think. And we kind of get cut off from our like deeper feelings, which is where there's so much healing and so much connection and so much love. So creating a space where like it's really coming from that vulnerable, honest, loving place. And it's a challenge, but it's possible, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I think, like you said, there's been so much progression in the positive direction regarding infertility, but there is something about the semantics of it. You still hear if someone, sometimes people, again, inadvertently, don't mean any harm by it, will say something like, "Oh, I have a friend who had infertility, but it was her husband's fault, not hers," or "It was her fault, not his," or whatever the variation could be. And I would hear this and I would go, "Ooh, that's really toxic."
Yeah.
It's really toxic language. Um, how, I mean, is this, as a society, like we said, we are growing, but there's also just this kind of belief that we have to point a finger at someone and say, like, "Oh, well, he or she couldn't do it the natural way."
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I do agree with you that I think that that is changing. And I think there's just more general kind of awareness around it so that um, people can come from a place of kind of just more understanding. I, yeah, that's where this shame comes in, that like the partner who feels like they're not able to get pregnant naturally, or they, you know, they might feel a lot of shame or a lot of guilt. And this is where it needs to be expressed and it needs to be processed. And yeah, it's a challenge. But I think also, like, when I think about some of the reproductive endocrinologists and fertility doctors who've just worked with thousands of patients, it's like there's this element of medicine and science to getting pregnant, but they'll all say there's this element of the kind of miraculous and the unknown,
Yeah.
and this kind of being curious about what's unfolding, and staying in that place of like, I believe this for myself, I feel it for myself, I have this dream for a reason, and
Mhm.
really staying open to the possibility that like the lab results don't mean everything. And we get really attached to that. We get really attached to time. We get really attached to numbers because we want to control something that
Mhm.
ultimately we don't have control over. So I guess that's like a bit of a runaround answer
Yeah.
to your thought or your question. But
No, there is something about keeping that. I guess it would be like the power of thought, having some sort of mantra. I know for me, and this was just my experience, I had this prayer, and it wasn't seeped in any religion. It was just for me, it was my prayer. And every night since I was diagnosed with infertility, I would say this prayer and I would visualize me in a rocking chair with my child.
mm,
Not to say that always works, but for me, it gave me tranquility in the moments where I felt like you said, I had no control. I had no control. I didn't know what was going to happen in the future. But I thought, okay, somehow, some way, whether it's biologically my child or I adopt a child, I'm going to keep that visualization of me in that rocking chair singing a lullaby to my baby. And it just was something that I kept doing, even when I had the 10-day wait, all of it. And at first, for me, I had a negative result. So I just was like, this didn't work. And oh my gosh. And like, I was just so defeated. And then the next test, it was positive. And I realized for me that that was science and a miracle, because the odds were totally stacked against me. So that is not lost on how very fortunate I am. And I know that a lot of people watching this have not had that experience, and my heart breaks for them. But the one thing we all have is the power of hope and faith, and there's so many amazing options to make someone a parent these days.
Yeah, yeah. We get really attached to a particular outcome, right? And I think that it's this fertility journey, and I don't call it an infertility journey. I really don't like that word, so I just don't use it, because again, mindset is everything, right? Like, it's like, what is it to live a fertile life? What is it to bring that into all aspects of your life, and I don't mean to gloss over the pain and the frustration and the heartache of so many, people's experiences in any way, but I think we have to, whatever we're dealing with in life, whether it's
Mhm.
wanting to get pregnant, or the passing of a family member, or god knows what, like, we have to look at, like, what is there here for me to learn? How is this making me a deeper, wiser, stronger, more empathetic human being? And that, as we kind of orient to our lives in that way, we bring in a lot of change and hope, and the potential for like greater transformation, including the thing that we want, but all the other things that come in through that process.
Yeah, I mean, some of the takeaways I think too is just a greater compassion and empathy for others that are facing similar challenges. I mean, I before this, I heard of people who couldn't get pregnant, and of course, you think, oh, that's really sad. But then when it happens to you, you're like, like there's so much gravity to it. Um, so I certainly learned a lot, and I hope that having these conversations for people that have either are embarking on, as you said, the fertility journey, or have just got diagnosed with some unfortunate news, it all goes back to not a single one of us is alone.
Mm.
uh, there are so many people who are feeling, again, not the same but similar emotions and feelings, and there's definitely no stigma or shame in having a harder time to
Yeah.
get pregnant than somebody else.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And that, again, that's that, like, the power of really connecting with others, and being able to express your authentic self through this, and the things that I've just seen transform through that process. It's pretty remarkable. So I
Yeah,
agree.
well, you're doing really powerful work, and you're helping people that need it. So thank you for imparting your wisdom, your expertise, and for sharing that. We're all in this together, even if we don't know it. We're all in it together.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Danielle.
Thanks. I really appreciate the talk and everything that you guys are doing with the Endometriosis Foundation. It's so needed. It's so needed. It's so important. And yeah, getting the word out there is just, so these things that are actually normal are normalized. These things that are actually a part of life and that many people experience. It's like, yeah, it really helps.
Doesn't have to be behind closed doors anymore.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. There's no reason for it. There's no reason to be ashamed.
Yeah.
So thank you, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thanks. Likewise. Take care.